This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. When I was writing my book, The Complete Turtle Trader, after chapter 5, which were the rules that Richard Dennis and Bill Eckhart taught the turtles, chapter 6 I titled In the Womb, because at that moment in time, armed with Richard Dennis and Bill Eckhart's rules, the turtles were in the womb, so to speak. They were controlled. They were in an office, they had someone else's money, they had someone else's rules, and they had to follow those rules. And if they did not, there were problems. But you can imagine if you take an experiment like this, with so much money on the line, so many different personalities on the line, and you put them all in a room, it's kind of like a Twilight Zone episode, some kind of weird experiment on a desert island. A fascinating case study into the human element, the human psychology. Now, if you listen to this podcast, you know there have been very successful turtle traders, starting with Jerry Parker, Tom Shanks, Paul Raybar, Liz Cheval, and several others. There have also been some that I can best describe as psychotic nut jobs. And if you really need to find out who the psychotic nut job turtle traders were, you can find that out. Now, the only thing you can really learn from those types of people are perhaps how to not be a psychotic nut job. So in case you are close to being a psychotic nut job, it might help you to investigate those particular turtles, the ones that kind of went off the rails. But for the ones that had success, and for those of us out there that like to model success and like to look up to success, again, you'll find those too. And to share today, to take you into my Turtle Trader audiobook, Chapter 6, In the Womb, which came right after Chapter 5, The Rules. It's the story that never gets old. Because, let's face it, a Hollywood screenwriter could not have made up the Turtle Trader story. It's just too real. Without any further delay from me, let's jump right in to Chapter 6 of my book, The Complete Turtle Trader. I hope you enjoy.
Chapter 6, In the Womb. It's possible to train people to perform to a certain level in chess, but if this training does not promote self-education and a philosophical attitude, then the trainees will be little more than performing seals. Nigel Davies, Daily Speculations. How many turtles were there? The number of turtles is in dispute. Dennis and Eckhart not only included people selected from want ads in the training room, they also invited an assortment of colleagues who were already working for them. Other people in the office entourage, who were close enough to pick up the essential concepts of what they were teaching, ended up exposed to the turtle rules. Take, for example, Mark Walsh. Walsh was not an official turtle, but someone who was traded like a turtle for 20 years. With a track record of better than 20% average annual performance, he is an equal to turtles who managed money for clients since 1988. Sam DiNardo, a generally accepted turtle, didn't want his definition of the Turtle Club violated. I love Mark Walsh. I've known him for a long time, but he wasn't really a turtle. And I think the turtles, the real turtles, feel strongly about keeping the group true to what the list was. DiNardo also argued against Craig Soderquist as a turtle, even though the Wall Street Journal had referred to him as one. Soderquist was somebody involved in Rich's life at the time, who maybe got a couple guys' notes from the meetings. However, Robert Moss, head of Richard Dennis's trading floor operations in New York from 1984 to 1988, stated without a moment's hesitation that Soderquist was a turtle. Moss's job was to execute daily for C&D Commodities thousands of futures contracts across New York trading pits. He would know. Yet Jeff Gordon, a verified turtle, disagreed with Moss, saying that the turtles were only those who traded Dennis's money. Clearly, many people, official turtles or not, learned the methods simply because they were close to the action in the C&D offices. It was easy to see that once Dennis and Eckhart started the training phase of their experiment, it was similar to the informal seminars Dennis and Tom Willis had held in the 1970s. Training was open to a much wider circle than turtles hired via the ad would have preferred. The refinements and distinctions as to who was and who was not a turtle went right to the heart of what was to become a serious competition. They might have all been told they were equal, and perhaps they were initially, but this was no game. Millions of dollars were on the line. The office environment. Within the offices of C&D Commodities, the turtles were Dennis's pet project. They were viewed as worker bees, freeing him up for bigger picture political initiatives. Robert Moss said that they were essentially a stable of Little Richards, no pun intended. That stable had very little impersonal oversight once they were trained. Russell Sands, for one, was surprised at the complete lack of supervision. He noted, "We might have seen Rich, Bill, or Dale once a week on a Friday afternoon for 2 hours." According to Sands, they would walk in and say, "How did you guys do this week? Anybody have any questions?" That was it. If one of the turtles did not follow the rules, Dennis and Eckhart, who reviewed their daily statements, would call up and ask for an explanation. Sands added, "But aside from that, there was no mentoring. There was no supervision. There was nothing. We were totally on our own. It was, here's the money, keep a journal, write down every trade you took and why you took it." The turtles would become more famous and successful over time, but in the beginning there was no fanfare. The working conditions were Spartan. Dennis provided them with a large trading office, sandwiched between 2 floors in the Insurance Exchange building. It was furnished with metal desks and chairs. The basic amenities, such as a coffee machine or TV, were missing. There was a bookcase with trading books that hardly anyone ever read. Eventually, a ping-pong table was brought in. The turtle seating arrangements were reminiscent of grade school. They were seated 2 by 2, with 6-foot-tall dividers between the cubicles. The informal, no-frills environment was typical of the way Dennis ran his business and his life. Mr. Anti-Establishment was passing his attitude down to his students. This attitude left others in the building wondering what the turtle office was up to. After all, they had all kinds of downtime trading as trend traders. They would go for days without trading. On top of that, there was no dress code. They used to show up to work in summer in cutoffs and T-shirts. A Harvard MBA worked side by side with a recent high school graduate. A Jehovah's Witness played ping pong with a blackjack player from Eastern Europe. Jewish and Christian students were mixed into one diverse office. Consider Anthony Bruck, a wiry and fashionable Chicago socialite and artist. He reminded some of Andy Warhol. He'd come to work dressed in skin-tight black clothes. Bruck, like Jim Kenney, was a friend of Dennis before the experiment started. Earl Kiefer loved the wild diversity of what was almost a mini United Nations. You had people who didn't have a college degree, then people who had doctorates. Anthony Bruck had a doctorate in linguistics. Actually, I think that probably helped him to be a good trader, because you had to think about it analytically and conceptually. Mike Carr was a terrific demonstration of Dennis's eclectic hiring policy. He couldn't spell future, as in trading futures, so to speak, in the beginning. Carr, like other newbie turtles, had to be shown a chart and how to read it. He was living proof that you did not need a Harvard MBA to excel. Even more unusual was the inclusion of Lucy Wyatt. For years, people who were aware of the turtle story have assumed there was only one female turtle, Liz Chevelle. But it turns out that there were 2. Wyatt was a friend of William Eckhart's. Jim DeMaria noted, "While the rest of us were like turtles, and that's what we were and that's what we did, she would kind of come and go. She did actually have a desk in the room. I guess maybe that's the turtle barometer. You have a desk in that room. Off the record, several turtles who'd been hired through the screening process commented that having Dennis employees and friends in the room trading as turtles caused strife. One said, "The regular turtles, so to speak, wondered how in the hell were they ever picked for this program. The ones not picked via screening process just didn't have the mental horsepower for it." All one turtle could remember about Wyatt was that she was always doing her nails. Mike Covel said that Wyatt had been Eckhart's girlfriend. He noted, "She was in the room with us, so of the people, if you were going to say who was a turtle and who wasn't, she would have been considered to be the least likely to be called a turtle." Did Wyatt trade? Apparently yes. Many people who hear the turtle story make excuses for why they could never fit in. Wyatt made it clear that anyone could have fit in with the turtles. Wildly differing political views did not keep turtles from fitting in either. Jerry Parker and Richard Dennis, for example, were political opposites. Mike Shannon painted Parker in extreme terms. He was about as right-wing conservative as you can get, and we had people in there who were more liberal than rich by a long shot. Shannon got a kick out of the political diversity crammed into the one-room office. He said, "Jerry was far right, and at the time I was more far left. We would really lock horns once in a while on certain political and social issues. He is so far right. It's just unbelievable. I just never really took him seriously in that regard." However, Shannon did take Parker seriously as a trader, saying, "He's very good. But the funny thing is, with all of that, when it came to the actual trading and discussing the systems and methodologies, we were all on the same page. No matter what the political background or social background, we all tried to cooperate as much as possible." These political differences were no small matter. Jeff Gordon learned this firsthand at a dinner before the 1984 presidential election. Everybody knew Mondale was Dennis's guy. Dennis started going around the table asking everyone who they were voting for. One by one, they all said, "Mondale." They were all his guests, and Dennis was one of the richest guys around. However, when it was Gordon's turn, he said, "Gary Hart." Gordon knew he had just upset the trading king of Chicago. However, far more important than any political differences were the commonalities. Mike Covel saw all the turtles as extremely bright, but viewed the group as an interesting mix of competitive and easygoing people. He believed that the great majority of the turtles could have had a day filled with total disasters, yet still be pleasant. In hindsight, it's hard to know for sure if the turtles were like what Covel described, or if they ultimately became like that as a result of their unique situation. No one was going to make waves when a rich guy was giving out millions to a group to trade with an incentive plan to make their own millions. That kind of opportunity kept mouths closed. The turtles, however, didn't immediately realize that they had been given the golden goose for making millions. Since they had to hit the ground running, they did not have time to test the rules Dennis had given them. They had to trust Dennis and Eckhart implicitly. Earl Kiefer, hired in the second turtle class, was in the minority with his desire for a proof of concept. Like his mentor, Kiefer remained skeptical. "You said I learned about the golden goose, but I didn't have a computer program, hadn't seen printouts, hadn't seen proof of concept. You know what I mean?" As time went on, some turtles did test the rules Dennis gave them. This effort changed the direction of the turtle program. Still, initially, the turtles executed their trades based on the rules they had been taught. They were making big money doing so. In fact, all were now making more money than they ever had in their lives. At that moment, everyone associated with C&D Commodities was certain that they had proven nurture trumps nature, even if no one outside of the firm knew this yet. A boring trading strategy. The turtles experienced what the term free time really meant. There simply was no trading if a market didn't move. Not trading when there was no market movement was, in fact, one of the most important rules of all. No trending market, no profit. No market moves, no calling Robert Moss to place trades. These long periods of doing nothing would be considered useless by today's hyperactive crowd, in love with checking stock quotes every minute. However, the Turtles would have had no need for hot tips from the likes of Jim Cramer of Mad Money or CNBC's David Faber's latest breaking news story. Today, people gobble up dozens of trading infomercials and nightly advice from everyone under the sun on what to buy and sell. All of this was useless to the Turtles. Today's get-rich-quick crowds have created a whole culture of traders afraid of missing something. They obsess about analysis about what the markets have done or are going to do, even if it has no direct connection to their trading decisions. The Turtles, on the other hand, were perfectly content to do nothing when the rules said to do nothing. The Turtles would come in every day already armed with their war plans so that they didn't make bad decisions in the heat of the battle. Stare at the screen and it's going to say, "Do something, trade me." All top traders today work like hell to develop a trading philosophy. They convert that philosophy to rules. After that, they stand back and see if their rules act as expected. If you build a system that gives you an entry and exit, tells you how much to bet along the way, and adjusts to your current capital and current market volatility at all times, no more analysis is needed. The Turtles did not fight this boring state of affairs. However, everyone handled downtime differently. Jerry Parker, for example, played electronic baseball until he had figured out all the tricks. Does that mean Parker was goofing off and not trading properly? No, far from it. Parker was always prepared. Self-discipline meant doing nothing until the time came to do something. Parker knew what role they played in Dennis's life when he said that Dennis ran the training because he wanted to have a certain chunk of money traded using systematic rules, while he went on and tried out new techniques. But for now, their trading was all about downtime. It was for the Turtles a deliberate process of following about 30 markets, waiting to do something. They didn't trade foreign markets at the time. Many of those were yet to be invented. Their basket of markets was not very active. The Turtle think tank did have occasional undercurrents and personal biases, particularly when it came to Liz Cheval. This was Chicago trading in the early 1980s, and some Turtles thought sexism was an issue. The fact that some Turtles may not have taken Cheval seriously was not easy to deal with. Michael Shannon said, "Between guys hitting on her and guys shunning her and stuff, it kind of made her somewhat ambivalent to the whole Turtle process." Cheval appreciated the fact that she was getting a great education in the program, but she may have had some residual animosity toward other Turtles. Shannon added support. "A lot of people just underestimated her. You have to remember this was the 80s. How many women commodity traders did you know at the time?" Even though they were the Turtles, it clearly did not mean they were all behaving with the decorum of choir boys. Jiri Sooba used his inordinate amount of downtime for other ventures beyond trading. He was always trying to figure out ways to beat the house. This, however, was not gambling in the way most people think of it. His view was all about understanding the odds and making money. Sooba had no problem leaving the office for 2 or 3 months at a time. Other Turtles made sure his trades got placed properly once Sooba had worked out all of his if-then contingencies. In turn, he then spent much of his time in Las Vegas developing systems that could read cards being dealt at blackjack tables. This behavior was fine within the parameters of the experiment because Dennis himself had created the atmosphere of, "Get the job done and I don't care where you are physically." By giving Turtles his rules, his money, his brokers, and his ATRs, the computed daily volatility for each market, or what they called N, Dennis had taken away much of the day-to-day routine the Turtles would have been experiencing had they been trading entirely on their own. The trading day unfolded with the Turtles tracking their group of markets. If one or more of those markets generated an entry or exit signal, they picked up the phone, called to the trading floor, and made the trade. Then they would wait for the market to move one way or the other before picking up the phone and calling the floor again. The turtles were on their own survivor island. They marked all of their charts and made all their calculations on loose-leaf paper. If they wanted a Wall Street Journal, they had to buy it. Dennis, of course, would have paid, but he was a technical trader, not a fundamental guy. There was no reason to study the journal every day. Think about how many people in 2007 read the Wall Street Journal daily from start to finish, searching for fundamental insights. Consider how many people scan annual reports or crop reports online. Not the turtles. Everything they did was basic. The turtles would actually write down their orders for the next day and make a carbon copy. They would leave the carbon copy behind in case they couldn't make it in the next day. That way their orders would still be executed properly. Jim DeMaria laughed, "People don't even know what carbon paper is anymore." Beyond the day-to-day office idiosyncrasies, the physical locations of the turtles would soon change dramatically. For that first year, they were all in the same office, but after that, some left. Mike Covel was in the office for 1 year before he moved home to Boston to continue working for Dennis long distance. Russell Sands was gone after the first year, too. He left the program completely. Their office environment was slowly changing as time went by. Jim DeMaria said, "At some point, half the people, like Jerry Parker, moved back to Virginia, his home. So those of us Chicago people who wanted to stay, we moved to a smaller office. But the dynamic was gone at that point." Early on, when everyone was together in Chicago, there were bonding moments as they labored in the trenches with little outside guidance. They were not expert traders out of the gate, far from it. To begin with, almost all the turtles were in their 20s or late teens. It wasn't long before the first-year class was down 50% each on average 6 months into the program. If you think some of them were panicking, you're right. Still, out of those early volatile performance swings came personal anecdotes that put their daily grind into perspective. September 1985, for example, was a difficult learning moment. The Group of 7 finance ministers made a concerted effort to weaken the U.S. dollar. Over the weekend, they changed their policy on the dollar. All of the currencies quickly gapped a couple hundred points higher. Some of the turtles were short. Jeff Gordon, who had exited his positions, remembered that Tom Shanks was still short. He said, "You have to imagine, here we are, managing millions of dollars. We come in Monday. We have these positions, and the market is so much against you. We have large positions. We've just lost a horrendous amount of money, through no fault of our own." Gordon was pointing out that Shanks was following Dennis's rules, and that by following those rules exactly, he had incurred significant losses. Even though the turtles were given precise rules, Dennis's weakness for discretionary decisions rubbed off on his students. In theory, they all had the same rules for selecting markets to trade, when to enter and exit, and how much to buy and sell. However, there were ongoing incidents of exceptions to the rules. One of those exceptions involved a Coco Trade. Earl Kiefer vividly recalled it. "Coco was going out the roof. We generated the whole move because we were allowed to add on. We had the whole market. The guys on the floor knew it was rich as traders, but they just kept the market going. We push it up another 10 points and they add on. We are shoving that through the roof, and when our buying dried up, the market collapsed. We all got stung hard because honestly we were loaded. Phil Liu was the only one who didn't have any Coco positions." During the Turtle program, Dennis had a policy that 1 day a year all turtles would individually go to lunch with him. They got to trade with Dennis for the day, so to speak. When Phil Liu came back from his day with Dennis, he thought Dennis was unhappy with him. Dennis wanted to know what caused Liu not to take the Coco trade. Liu's decision not to take the trade clearly was against how they had been trained. Liu had a reason. Each day the turtles had to write down their contingencies for the day. Lou, who never really had the intense trader drive, simply had 2 pages on his computer listing his if-then contingencies, his buy and sell points for each market each day, and his second page listed Coco. It turns out that Lou had a rule that if he had 2 pages and if a trade wasn't on page 1, he wouldn't trade it. Coco was on page 2 for him. Dennis said, "Why didn't you trade Coco? What told you?" Lou said, "Oh, I only trade stuff that is on my first page, and Coco wasn't on my first page." Lou thought he saw Dennis's face fall. After all, Dennis, ever the curious skeptic, had hoped he was about to learn something new from one of his students. Lou's trading was a great example of the imprecision within the turtle world that could and did lead to different levels of performance. It was the type of incident that showed even though the turtles were doing exceedingly well trading, there were reasons for differing performance numbers. Dennis's hiring process loaded the experiment up with real characters. Perhaps the most colorful background of any turtle was that of Mike Shannon. At one point, I asked Shannon if there was anything else to know about the whole turtle process. He said bluntly and out of left field, "You know that I was a criminal, right?" Before explaining himself, he said his story deserved a disclaimer. First, his transgressions were 25 years ago, and second, he is very anti-drug today. He then explained, "Probably about 2 or 3 years before I joined Richard Dennis, I was a drug dealer. I used to control about maybe 80% of the drug traffic within the Rush Street nightclub scene in Chicago." Other turtles confirmed his account, but this unusual story kept unfolding long into the turtle program. After he had been working for Dennis for 15 months or so as a turtle, Shannon was called to testify in a federal drug case for the government. Dennis found out and called him into the office. Shannon thought he was going to be let go when Dennis reached into his briefcase and pulled out a transcript of the trial. Dennis was stern. "Now look, I am not going to fire you if you tell me the truth. Just tell me the truth. What's going on?" Shannon gave up the whole story about his drug-dealing past and his current side gig working for the FBI. Dennis was shaking his head. "Are you done with them?" Shannon had no clue whether they were done with him. Shannon was convinced that Dennis was the reason his problems went away. He said, "I was well into the turtle program and I was a little profitable as well. I think if I was a marginal trader, he might have cut me loose." Shannon said that Dennis's political connections ended his nightmare, adding, "So I have no criminal record." Another turtle said about Dennis's handling of Shannon, "Rich grew up around a lot of pretty tough guys, being in the trading business and everything else. Rich knew that there was always another story. By his nature, Rich is an amazingly forgiving person." Throughout the turtle blowouts, quirky trading decisions, and a federal narcotics investigation, Dennis treated his people right. On one occasion, he flew the entire C&D entourage to Las Vegas to see the rock band Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He was a 1970s music aficionado, after all. Even though he might have led an outwardly frugal life, Dennis was generous to everyone he came in contact with. The group dynamic. The turtles were exposed to ideas with tremendous power, but those ideas did not come without a price. Human nature was always at play. It was one thing to practice applying Dennis and Eckhart's rules on a blackboard, but learning how the rules performed in live action was critical for confidence. In this sense, the turtles' training had unmistakable parallels with the U.S. Army Rangers training regime. The Rangers work under the assumption that extraordinary performance can't come from rehearsing under ordinary conditions. Elite troops can be forged only from extraordinary challenges that force them to draw upon emotional and physical reserves they never knew they possessed. Trading for Dennis was the same. The turtles had been taught how to handle their worst-case trading scenarios and to feel confident in any trading situation, but it wasn't easy. Gaining confidence, whether turtle or ranger, involved a setting. The Turtles were in an empty office learning their way. The Rangers were in a physical training pit learning theirs. Both groups always had the eerie feeling that someone was watching over them. In a way, the Turtles and Rangers were both trapped, though voluntarily. They had signed over their lives to people they didn't know with the expectation that those people would subject them to pain. Of course, the Turtles did not endure the physical pain of Ranger School, but they certainly endured psychological pain while they gained confidence in their ability to trade. Whether intentional or not, the Turtle office environment fostered a tribe-like atmosphere. And many Turtles saw their group, or tribe dynamic, as crucial while they were in the womb, trading Dennis's millions. Earl Kiefer felt the psychological need. The reason we all needed to stay together, especially in the beginning, was we literally made all our money in a normal year in about a 3-week period. The rest of the year, most people were down minus 30%. And then the markets all clicked in, and we had bullets to fire because of Rich's money management scheme. You can go from minus 30% down to a plus 150% up in 3 weeks with no trouble at all. Slaving away together as comrades in arms was important because they were getting the crap kicked out of them on a day-to-day basis, with lots of small losses and very little positive reinforcement. When the big trend came, it was great, but they still had to patiently wait for it to happen. Imagine sitting there day after day with a multi-million-dollar trading account funded by a guy who is Chicago's trading royalty. And imagine that the account appears to be slowly dwindling away, little bit by little bit, even though you are doing what you are supposed to do. There was self-doubt. There was concern. The group dynamic helped the Turtles alleviate stress and reassure each other that they were all doing the right thing. As time passed, though, the Turtles saw Dennis's system making huge amounts of money from big trends. They finally had the psychological assurance of, I know this works in my gut, and you can't take that away from me. However, even with the tribe-like atmosphere, even with the Ranger parallels, even with learning in their guts what it really meant to trade like Dennis, as evidence accumulated, it showed that the group process had ultimately turned out not to be significant. That's because the Turtle trading tribe was ultimately undermined by an unexpected threat, competition and jealousy. Liz Cheval addressed the rivalry head-on when she declared, at the end of the day, the numbers are there in black and white. Either you made money or you didn't. The Turtles would soon learn that trading for Dennis over the 4-year life of the program was more complicated than the black and white world described by Cheval. The Turtle trading experiment was about to become an experiment inside an experiment, with newly confident Turtles just as quickly burdened with self-doubt.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.